Hi, everybody. This is founder of Gluten Free Society, Dr. Peter Osborne, and today I have a special interview with Dr. William Davis, who's on our medical board of advisors, and so I'm excited to share his background and information with you. Welcome, Dr. Davis.
We're glad to be here.
So let's dive right in. Can you tell us a little bit about your academic and medical training and background?
Sure. I practiced what's called interventional cardiology for 25 years, meaning doing procedures like angioplasty, stent implantation, atherectomy, aborting heart attacks, all those kinds of things. I did my training at Ohio State University, where I did my residency, then fellowship, and then I did advanced training in angioplasty in a university in Cleveland, and then I took over as assistant professor and was director of the cath lab for some time, director of the cardiovascular fellowship, and then I went to private practice and moved to Milwaukee. So, but a long history of doing a lot of interventional cardiology. I got my introduction to preventive cardiology, though, after my mom died of sudden cardiac death after her successful two-vessel coronary angioplasty that she had in New Jersey, where I'm from. But it got me started thinking about and realizing just what a flawed system it was that relied on a cath lab or a procedure to deal with people with heart disease, and how we really needed to identify people months, years, decades before those kinds of bad things happen. That set me on the course for doing more preventive things. And that goes back now about almost 20 years.
Wow. So then what led you down the path to looking at grains, at gluten, your book Wheat Belly, world famous, book. What kind of led you down looking at food as a potential for the prevention aspect of cardiovascular?
Well, I came at this because I set up a CT scanner for heart disease. So this goes way back, 20-some years before this was very popular, where we were looking for coronary calcium scoring. That's how you identify coronary disease, the potential for heart attack and sudden cardiac death, potentially years before it happens. So we got the funding. We opened a place called Milwaukee Heart Scan and started scanning people left and right in Wisconsin. And you quickly find out just how much hidden heart disease there really is in people who look like they're at risk and people who don't look like they're at risk. Well, if you do nothing, so you have all these people around me with high heart scan scores, normal is 0. They have scores of 300, 700, 1,000 at very significant risk for heart attack, death, or needing a procedure. And it was quickly apparent, if you did nothing and you watch these scores increase, they go up at 25% per year. If you give the best they have in medical treatment, a statin drug for cholesterol, aspirin, a beta blocker to reduce high blood pressure, a low-fat diet, an exercise program, the score goes up 25% per year. It has zero impact on the growth of atherosclerotic plaque by this device. And so it set me on, I'm having people freak out on me. What do? My score is 500, 650, 822, or something like that. So we had to figure out a way to put a stop to this. The consensus opinion, by the way, back then, was just let those people have their heart attacks or have symptoms and then deal with it as a procedure, which I thought was shameful, but that was the consensus opinions of my colleagues as the experts. So I set about looking for better answers. There was a lot of stumbling, a lot of dead ends, a lot of mistakes, but it led to strategies like vitamin D, which, by the way, when you add vitamin D, it's the first time you'll see coronary calcium scores drop dramatically. A score of 800 can drop to 500. You actually see regression. But it also set me on the path of rejecting cholesterol as ridiculous and crude measure of cardiovascular risk. There are better measures. For instance, there's lipoprotein testing. So back then I was doing NMR lipoprotein testing, nuclear magnetic resonance lipoprotein testing, which is very easy. And it becomes immediately apparent when you do that the great majority of people with coronary disease, that is, these high heart scan scores, have an abundance of small LDL particles, not LDL cholesterol. If you have some with coronary disease, 99% of the time, they have a very high quantity of small LDL particles. So I asked myself back then, well, what foods cause small LDL particles? It's not bacon, it's not saturated fat, it's not total fat. Only 2 categories of food cause formation of small LDL particles: wheat and sugars. And in wheat and related grains, it's the amylopectin A carbohydrate. It's not the gluten, it's not the gliadin, it's the amylopectin A carbohydrate, the so-called supercarbohydrate wheat. When you take wheat and grains and sugars out of the diet, small LDL drops to the floor. It'll drop from something like 1,900 nanomoles per liter, particle count per volume, to 0 or some other low value. In other words, it wasn't a percentage improvement. It was obliteration of that abnormal pattern. But that's when people said, I removed all wheat and grains and sugar from my diet so I could reduce my small LDL cholesterol, but my type 2 diabetes went away. I had to stop my insulin. I lost 47 pounds in 3 months. The joint pain of rheumatoid arthritis went away. I stopped my 3 drugs. My migraine headache stopped. My irritable bowel syndrome symptoms stopped. My ulcerative colitis is now gone. I'm off all 3 drugs. My rosacea is gone. My depression has lifted. In other words, I had stumbled for the purposes of reducing small LDL particles on NMR lipoprotein testing on a program that restored health. And that's why I started asking, well, what the heck is it about removing wheat in particular that allows these kinds of unexpected things to happen?
I mean, that's amazing to see those types of changes, and the way you found it. I mean, I've since had conversations with other doctors, both of cardiology and in another field, find very similar experiences with when cutting grain out of the diet, seeing all kinds of really wonderful things happen in health improvements. So was this kind of the precursor work that you did then to writing Wheat Belly?
When I started seeing so many of these cases, the turning point for me was a young woman who was 38 years old, a school teacher, 2 little boys, Milwaukee cop husband, and she came to see me for a minor issue of palpitations. But she was always gripping her abdomen when I was talking to her. So I asked her, what's wrong? And she told me she had 12 years of ulcerative colitis. It was so bad that she was hemorrhaging from her colon, and her gastroenterologist told her she needed to have her colon removed, a colectomy, and they'd give her an ileostomy bag. That is a bag on the surface to collect the stool at age 38. And so I told her, well, you're here for palpitation, but can I tell you about the diet I use in most other people for coronary disease and other? She says, I don't. Why would you do that? Remove all wheat and grains? I don't have celiac disease. They biopsied me twice and checked all the blood markers. I don't have celiac disease. I said, I get that. You've got nothing to lose. Give it a try. So she does. I see her about 3 weeks later. She comes back, jumps on the table. I said, what happened? She said, you're not going to believe it. Within 5 days, the bleeding stopped. A few more days, all the cramps and diarrhea stopped. I stopped 1 drug. I stopped 2 drugs. And then she later stopped the 3rd drug. She went back to her gastroenterologist to show her that he was about to schedule her colon removal surgery. She said, look at me. I lost 38 pounds. By the way, I didn't tell her she'd lose 38 pounds. And my ulcerative colitis is now gone. I feel better than I have in 12 years. And he says, it's a coincidence. Just go back to what you're doing. And I got so angry at that a colleague of mine could face what is essentially cure. Now, maybe it doesn't apply to everybody, but I think you and I would say, well, gee, did I overlook something? Tell me what you did. Maybe I need to learn from your experience. And I saw this happen like that over and over and over again. It became clear that just sitting in my office and seeing this happen was not going to be good enough. And what surprised me even further was the wealth of science that has already been performed. For instance, showing that gliadin protein within gluten initiates autoimmune diseases like type 1 diabetes and rheumatoid arthritis, that the amylopectin A carbohydrate causes flagrant insulin resistance and high blood sugars and visceral fat, that wheat germ agglutinin binds all positively charged minerals in your gut. You pass out all the calcium, magnesium, manganese, zinc, and iron in the toilet. In other words, it's a collection of factors in wheat and grains that are health impairing, despite being told we must have healthy whole grains at every meal.
Yeah, and I love what you just said. It's a collective of evidence in wheat and grains, because I know when you originally wrote Wheat Belly, and then you came out with, I think it was a couple of books later, you'd come out and really started to take a stance against other grains as well. Can you share kind of what led to your thought process around why going after other grains beyond just wheat?
So as you know, when you pick enemies, you got to pick your battles. And I picked the worst of them all, which is modern wheat, and there's a variety of reasons. One of the reasons is that modern wheat is nothing like traditional wheat. Not to say traditional wheat is benign, it's not, but it's less bad. Modern wheat is an 18-inch tall, high-yield semi-dwarf strain, essentially created in the laboratory. It's very, very different. Looks different, behaves different. They did that to increase yield per acre, by the way. And they also did introduce a lot of changes to improve pest resistance. And that's why modern strains of wheat have higher quantities of wheat germ agglutinin, because it's a very good pest-resistant compound, but it's also highly toxic to humans in the gastrointestinal tract. They also increase the content of phytates by selecting strains with higher phytate content, because phytates are likewise very pest-resistant, but phytates bind all those minerals in your gut and you pass them out. And that's why I've seen countless ladies, females, who've had struggles with iron deficiency anemia, getting transfusions, iron injections, prescription iron, and living with hemoglobin values in the anemic range, 7 or 8, being tired and cold all the time and breathless. And the doctor couldn't tell them why. They go grain-free, and hemoglobin is normal within 2 weeks. And so I've seen all this happen so many times. But when you start to look at the other grains, there's one fundamental thing I think it helps a lot of listeners to understand. Grains are seeds of grasses. That they literally are seeds of grasses. And humans simply do not have the digestive enzymes that allows them to break down the proteins in grass plants. We can't eat the husk. We can't eat the stalk, the seeds, the roots. We can try to eat the seeds, but even then, that is grains, we can't digest many of the protein components. And so when you eat, for instance, the gliadin protein, you can't break it down to single amino acids like you would, say, an egg or a pork chop. You break it down to 4 or 5 amino acid long pieces or peptides. Those are the peptides, by the way, that have opioid effects on the human brain and stimulate appetite and have other peculiar brain effects. But it became clear that other grains, to varying degrees, share a lot of these properties. So the gliadin protein in wheat looks a lot like the secalin protein of rye, looks a whole lot like the hordein protein of barley, and looks a lot like the zein protein of corn. And the wheat germ agglutinin, that's highly toxic to the gastrointestinal tract, is in wheat, rye, barley, and in rice. So the deeper you dig, the more overlap you see among all the seeds of grasses.
And what do you think, your colleagues in gastroenterology, right? I mean, this science is out there. This science is, and we've been pushing this science to the forefront for 20 years now plus. And why do you think that it's such a stretch for gastroenterology, just standard traditional medicine, to embrace some of this information? Because I get people all the time that come from, they come from University of Maryland or University of Chicago where they've been diagnosed with celiac disease, and they walk out of there with a gift basket that's loaded with corn and rice and other garbage-based foods. Like, why will the profession not embrace this when the research exists? What's your opinion about that?
The Dr. Peter Osbornes of the world are the exception. The practitioners who pay attention to nutrition and science and reason it through. You and I know that the vast majority of conventional mainstream physicians, gastroenterologists, cardiologists, ophthalmologists, endocrinologists, they practice what I call, sadly, willful ignorance. They choose not to know what is truly helpful because there's too much. This is going to sound very cynical. There's too much money to be made in doing other things, like doing endoscopy and colonoscopy. In my world, I get paid a lot more to do heart catheterizations and atherectomies and transcutaneous valvular replacements. That pays a darn lot more than practicing prevention. And that's what happens. There's not a whole lot of other ways that an ophthalmologist can continue to make $2 to $3 million a year making those ridiculous injections into the eye, into the vitreous. So they're locked into a style and philosophy of practice that makes them blind, essentially, to all the practices. And you're right. When a celiac person is told to eat gluten-free, and gluten-free foods are made with cornstarch, tapioca starch, potato flour, and tapioca starch, that is things that raise blood sugar sky high, cause insulin resistance, visceral fat accumulation, and the cornstarch is contaminated by the zein protein, which reactivates celiac disease. It is wildly stupid to tell someone with celiac disease to eat like that, yet that is the mainstream prevailing standard.
Yeah, I know. I've had a number of conversations with gastro docs and many of them just agree to disagree. And to me, it's not even agreeing to disagree. It's agreeing to not look at the research that our other colleagues have been so diligent in performing to be able to, have information that we can actually read and apply in clinical practice.
Absolutely. It's a big problem.
So for you, what's next for Dr. William Davis? You've got your several books, New York Times best-selling books. You've got your blog, wheatbellyblog.com. Is there something new on the horizon that you're working on currently?
Yeah, we've been playing a lot with microbiome issues. So one of the things we've been doing, for instance, just one example of this kind of purposeful cultivation of bowel flora. There are 2 strains of Lactobacillus reuteri that you can buy as a product called Gastrus, Gastrus, from a company called BioGaia in Sweden, Biogaia. And they sell you these tablets with 100 million counts of 2 strains of Lactobacillus reuteri. They sell you in small counts because these tablets are made for babies, because reuteri given to children reduces infantile colic and reduces regurgitation of breast milk or formula. But I wanted to see what happens when you jack up the bacterial count. So I made yogurt using a very peculiar modification of the fermentation method, extended fermentation, 36 hours rather than 4 hours of conventional yogurt making. And we ferment in the presence of prebiotic fibers, because that's what bacteria like to eat. We do that at 100 degrees Fahrenheit for 36 hours. You get a very rich, thick, delicious yogurt, because we start with organic half and half, by the way. And there's some issues to talk about with dairy versus non-dairy. But you make a rich, delicious yogurt, but it's really not yogurt. It's nothing more than a bacterial count amplification system. But when you consume a half cup of this a day, which yields about 90 billion counts by our analysis, you get some pretty cool effects. You provoke hypothalamic release of oxytocin, hypothalamic and pituitary release of the hormone oxytocin, and you start to lose wrinkles, skin wrinkles within 4 weeks. You get an explosion of dermal collagen, a restoration of youthful collagen. You accelerate healing dramatically. There's a restoration of youthful muscle and strength. I'm going to be 63 in 2 months. I handle weight. I go to the gym 15 minutes once a week, so I can't stand going. But I'm handling weight that I handled when I was in my 20s. And I get perverse satisfaction while I'm pulling down the lat machine 200 pounds for 10 reps, and the 35-year-old guy next to me is doing 75 pounds. So, you also get an increase in libido. You get absolute suppression of appetite, so you become complete control of your appetite. Most of us, not all of us, get a dramatic deepening of sleep. I'm a chronic insomniac, but now I sleep like a baby, with vivid dreams and extension of REM sleep. And because you're provoking oxytocin, you also get empathy and a desire for human connection. So by restoring this bacterial strain that most modern people have lost, over 95% of Americans have now lost this reuteri strain that they got from their mothers with breastfeeding, but lost because of antibiotics, herbicide, pesticide residues, etc. You restore it, and you have this wonderful restoration of empathy and desire for. So it makes me wonder, we have modern problems with social isolation, record suicide rates, and divorce. Is at least a small part of that answer restoration of reuteri. So we're getting into some really cool little experiments with cultivating very specific bacterial species and obtaining very specific effects. In this case, what I think is amounting to age reversal. Wow, that's amazing. Are you planning on publishing some studies in your experience with this? A lot of this came out of animal experimental models, but then was corroborated by various groups. The skin healing has been corroborated. The bone density part of it preserves bone density. That has been corroborated in humans. We have a small clinical trial planned. We're going to look at various biomarkers, including oxytocin, but also testosterone, estradiol, and some other markers. IL-10 is another good marker, interleukin-10. But we've been postponed because of the pandemic. But we'll probably get that done, I hope, by fall, if things go well with the pandemic. But right now, because it's just consuming a fermented product, just by getting these very high counts of reuteri, we're seeing this play out in real life with very, very interesting effects. So personally, increased muscle, increased strength, deep sleep, really for a chronic insomniac to say that is wonderful. Increased empathy. You will feel that flood of empathy, by the way. you actually feel it. And it's a really cool thing. So, but I think it's the start of a whole series of some really cool stuff that we all can start participating in to cultivate. And you could get other things. You could get not just empathy and age reversal. It could also be accelerated recovery from exercise, as we get with Bacillus coagulans. Or one thing we've been doing during the pandemic is we've been cultivating this wacky product called Yakult, Y-A-K-U-L-T. It's not a very good product. It's made with non-fat dairy and sugar. It's a sugar drink. But it also contains 6.5 billion counts of Lactobacillus casei shirota. And while many bacterial strains improve immunity, the immune response, this casei shirota has good evidence that it reduces your potential for respiratory viruses by about 50%. And should you get a respiratory virus, it abbreviates the course by 50% or more, as well as reducing other markers of inflammation and infection. So we've been cultivating a yogurt out of that. It doesn't have to be yogurt, by the way. It could be carrot juice. It could be mango juice. It could be other veggies that you ferment with these bacterial strains. But we can start to look for these very specific effects, as well as broad effects from mixed culture yogurts as well. But I think it's the start of very purposeful, not just fermenting something on your counter and hoping for the best with various Lactobacillus, Bifidobacterium, Leuconostoc species. We're actually looking for very specific effects for targeted outcomes.
Yeah, I know that's amazing, and that I see more and more research coming out about different strains of bacteria having unique effects, as you're talking about. It's absolutely an exciting time to be involved. In health and wellness right now.
It really is. As a non-microbiologist, it's an overwhelming area, but there's a lot of cool stuff coming out. You know, we've got to persuade, for instance, the probiotic manufacturers to specify the strains, please, their products.
Absolutely. Well, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing and quite interesting. So if people want to find more information about you, where would you have us send them to connect with you?
The good starting places are Wheatbelly blog, Undoctored blog, of course Facebook attached to both of those places, and of course the Wheatbelly books and the Undoctored book. And there's also a brand new book called Wheatbelly Revised and Expanded, where just came out a few months ago, where I took a lot of the information packed across 7-8 books and put it into one book and updated all the content.
Oh, amazing. Fantastic. All right. Well, Dr. Davis, thank you so much for taking part and being a part of Gluten-Free Society's advisory board. We greatly appreciate you and your knowledge and all the work clinically that you've done over your lifetime. It's helped us leap light years ahead, I think, for people who are really, truly interested in regaining their health.
And I appreciate it that you formed this organization. I think it's a great idea.
Well, you have a wonderful day, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, Peter. Take care. Bye-bye.
Mm-hmm. Bye-bye.